important is home court in the first round of the playoffs for the Suns specifically?
My instincts are to say in the West with what I've seen this year is that home court doesn't matter, seedings doesn't matter. It's just who's healthy and who's playing well because they're so tightly back together. But I know the Warriors aren't in the 5th spot right now, but if you have an opportunity to play the Warriors, the defending champs, who we are going to assume are going to have their act together, this year you want home court against the Warriors. And typically when we're talking about teams that have the chance to play for a title, you're talking about getting multiple rounds at home. That's not going to be the case for the Suns, but I do think with the differential, the way the Warriors play at home and road, and because, frankly, the difference between the Suns being in 4th and sliding out of it if they have a bad few days, they need to stay in that spot. And they've got a couple of huge games coming up with the Nuggets. They play the Nuggets tomorrow at home, who could be their second-round matchup if they stay in 4th. And then they play them again next week. I have no idea who's going to play in those games. Jokic has missed a game now with calf soreness. But the Suns, not only do they need to establish a rhythm, but just in case the Warriors are in that 5th seed, Jay, got to try to hold on to 4.
You know what, Wendy? If Kevin Durant had played in more than 7 games in the year of 2023 for the Phoenix Suns, I might agree with you on that. But I think the lack of chemistry, and also from being at the Footprint Center in Phoenix for an NBA Finals experience, it was one of the best experiences in my life. And I've been to a lot of different NBA arenas. I don't think I've ever seen an arena that was so disruptive, that was so energetic the way they were in Phoenix. So I think having that home crowd behind you, since you talk about that slight margin for error between the 5th and the 6th or 7th or 8th seed, I think it's going to be pivotal for this team that has 6 games left in the regular season, that is truly trying to find their rhythm and hit the ground running. And because I think the Western Conference is the epitome of the rock, paper, scissor analogy, right? Hey, just because A beats B and B beats C doesn't mean that A can beat C. You know what I mean? So, how that works, it's so different this year because of the volatility that I think home court for a team where the big three hasn't really played together as much as they would like, I think is imperative this year more than ever for the Suns.
Yeah, and I also think, Phoenix is a team that needs its role players to play well, okay? Because the other teams are going to just ignore their 5th man on the court a lot of times. So they're going to need Torrey Craig to play well. They're going to need Josh Okogie to play well. They may need Ish Wainwright, who was on a 2-way a couple of months ago, to play well. And historically, role players play better at home. And so that's another thing. I still think it's more important for Durant to be healthy and Booker to be hot, which he's hot. But I do think if you're the Suns, even though you've got some guys who have a bunch of series together, the ball's going to find their way to the other teams are going to funnel the ball to those guys, those other role players. And you always hear Shaq talk about the others. The others are going to matter for the Suns on a lot of playoff games this year.
Yeah.
Well, the 4 seed overall has about a 58% chance winning percentage, right? Being at the 4 seed over the history over the last 25 years. So I think that does help. At the end of the day, though, when you have 2 of the most efficient scorers in the NBA today, the Phoenix Suns, to me, Wendy, epitomize what one-on-one basketball used to be back in the day. When I see kids play now, it's like you check the ball, they take 8,000 dribbles, right? I'm like, man, I'm not trying to guard you for 8,000 dribbles, right? Back in the day, 20 years ago, when we used to play one-on-one against Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, it was turn face, 3 dribbles or less. That's why people love playing with Kevin Durant. It's not wasted motion. People love playing with Devin Booker. Turn face, DBook is making a read and he's making a play. Get into the lane, drive, kick, get to the rim, pull up mid-range. I think that efficiency in how they play is what makes them elite. So I think their style can translate. It can play anywhere, but considering the lack of chemistry that they have playing together, I think it's easier to find that rhythm at home for the reasons that you made mention of, for the role players finding their rhythm, for people understanding. Even last night, Monty Williams, another great example. Hey, greatness doesn't shake his head, Kevin. Right? those things that happen when you're at home more so than being on the road in those disruptive, kind of volatile environments are way easier to figure out than being on the
Can I
road.
just say, I spent a lot of time around the Suns last couple of years. It was such a terrific Monty Williams moment because Monty has this way of giving like old adage things
Yes.
without sounding corny.
Yes.
So like you can watch every time he goes to a press conference, he wears a hat that says WD is greater than WS. That means well done is more important than well said, which is kind of his message that everything he says to the media isn't as important as what goes on out there.
Gotcha.
And like if the Suns are doing well, you know, he likes to say, "Don't get happy on the farm." You know, it's one of their things that they would say during their finals run a couple years ago. So just seeing Monty going up against a guy who is an elite Hall of Fame player, like what can you tell KD he hasn't already heard?
Right.
In the moment, hearing something like that. I mean, regardless of what happens to the Suns, that was a quintessential Monty moment. And Kevin has heard it all, but you could see that, like, Kevin heard that. That got to Kevin. He actually physically turned his whole body because it got to. I thought that was a really cool moment.
Last thing I'm going to say about
Yeah.
this too, Christine, Wendy, and tell me if this would surprise you, because if it would, I would be shocked. Would it surprise you if the Phoenix Suns got to the NBA Finals and DBook was Finals MVP?
No, I actually think Booker is the driving force of
Yes.
the team. I think Kevin Durant is kind of the, you know, he sort of sets the table, but D-Book's going to drive it. And D-Book, since the All-Star game, has been one of the top 5 players in the league. You know, he's only played 50 games because he had to sit out a bunch of time with groin and hamstring injuries. But since he's come back from that, like they had to like browbeat him to get him to shut it down because Book hates being out. He's come back from these hamstring injuries before, and he's not been right. They finally had to like lock him down in a room and say, "Get right." So I don't know if he's going to make the All-NBA team because I think the voters are going to have a hard time breaking ties, and they go, "He only played," because I think he can only play like 54 games total. I think people are going to be like, "Need him," but Devin Booker has been awesome. Some of the best basketball he's played in his career has happened over this last 5 or 6 weeks. And there's been so much that's gone around the Suns this year. Obviously the big trade, the Sarver stuff. People haven't noticed that Booker has been awesome. So I think in a playoff series, it would not surprise me if Booker is their leading scorer, and even with Kevin Durant on the team.
Are you surprised that things are this bad in Dallas?
Yes, I am. And I say that understanding that these guys have only played 17 games together. I say that understanding that whenever you have Dorian Finney-Smith that is no longer on the perimeter defending and Spencer Dinwiddie, that is a huge defensive aspect of your game that goes missing. I also understand that they let Jalen Brunson go for free. They got nothing in return for Jalen Brunson. And watching the rise of success for the New York Knicks, even with them winning last night with Julius Randle spraining his ankle, like there is a core competency and leadership and toughness that comes along and a temperament that comes along with Jalen Brunson. But the reason why you make that move is because you have 2 of the most prolific scorers in the NBA today on the same team. Let me tell you about what bothered me last night about this game in particular with the 76ers. And I understand, now we're in the trenches, we're in the details, because I don't like to make excuses, right? 17 games, all these things I just stated. Let's just win games. Let's focus on winning games now. There is a major concern, Wendy, that I have about Jason Kidd as a coach holding these guys accountable. In the last 8 minutes of the game, Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, who were prolific the 3 quarters before, took a combined 5 shots in the last 8 minutes of the game. A combined 5 shots. There is only one Dallas Maverick player who scored in the last 6 minutes of the ball game. That is Luka. Now, if you saw the strategy that the 76ers are doing, hey, we'll settle for everybody else shooting threes. But there comes a moment where when you have timeouts to burn, look, you two, be aggressive. Luka, I know your usage rate is the 2nd highest in the NBA. No possessions off. We've had leads in this game. I know that the 76ers just went on a 10-0 run, all right, in the last 6 minutes of the game. I do not care. Be aggressive, per NBA.com. With 50 clutch games that the Dallas Mavericks have played this year, they were 500. They were 500. So when you talk about a team, Wendy, that last year was in the Western Conference Finals, and I know you lose pieces, You need a coach to say in these moments, and I'm just saying, he deserves a lot of criticism here as well, because people are going to start attacking Kyrie Irving. People are going to start saying, well, sometimes Luka always complains at the refs and he walks back on defense. But there needs to be those details in those clutch moments of games for a team that is 500. Last night was unacceptable, and I think them losing games or finding ways to fold games in those moments throughout the course of this year, there are major questions you're asking around the personnel and the decision-making in clutch moments with Jason Kidd and the Dallas Mavericks, on top of what are they going to do to plug some of those holes defensively?
Yeah, so when they made the trade, they basically took Spencer Dinwiddie, who is a good offensive player on some nights. He's good, he's great, but good offensive player. And they traded him for one of the most elite offensive guards we've ever seen in Kyrie Irving. So they were a number 8 offense. They were the 8th best offense in the league when they made the trade. And the concept here was they were going to become like 1 or 2. They were going to become an absolute killer offense to make up for the fact that they traded away their best defensive player and they were going to get worse defensively. That was the arithmetic that they made. Maybe it wouldn't lead to a title this year, but it would lead to dynamic basketball that they could plug in around. Instead, in the 20-some games since the trade, they've backslid. They're now 10th. Now, that's a stat that's loaded with circumstance because obviously Luka's missed some games, Kyrie's missed some games. But going backwards and offensively, like they were not a top offensive team at the end of the game last night. That's not acceptable. And so that is what worries you. If they were killing it and they were both, and they've had a couple of games where they have, if they were both killing it and they just couldn't get stops, you'd be like, well, look, we knew they couldn't get stops, but at least they're killing it, and give them a transaction cycle over the summer. You know, they'll keep Kyrie. That you could at least get the building blocks of that. The concern for me is they haven't been great on offense. I thought that was a guarantee. I thought what we were going to be doing here in the last week of the season was like, well, look, I know that they're averaging 135 points, but they're giving up 130, and that's just not going to work in the playoffs. But boy, it's going to be fun to watch them. I mean, this is a team-building crisis. And I don't use that word lightly, crisis, because as you said, they lose Jalen Brunson for nothing. Now, they're in a situation where if they miss the playoffs, they're going to send the Knicks. Right now, they owe the Knicks a pick. It's top 10 protected. Right now, if they didn't get lucky in the lottery, which they would have a low chance of if they miss the playoffs, they'd send the 11th pick for a trade that was already failed, the Porzingis trade. So they've lost Brunson for nothing. They've traded for Kyrie Irving, who they don't control after this season, and they ship a great pick, as good of a pick as they possibly could send to the Knicks to rub salt in that wound. And I'm not sure what they can do structurally. They do have a couple of first-round picks they can trade. They do have a couple of young players that they could trade. Like, they're not totally hemmed in, but they're really they put themselves in a corner if this doesn't work.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.